every year.
There's a total disconnect now between the ruling group and the masses.
I hate psychology.
Clear out.
They're the same worm-like characters.
Analysts,
Fuck you with your stupid argument.
they should not bother us.
Democracy.
All of this just works.
Vote for the generations who are coming.
Fully dynamic game engine.
A millennial video essayist.
Always support strength
Constant craving.
and identity.
I haven't yearned. They are a disease of our time.
Clear them out. You're voting for what your grandfather and father fought for.
I sit and yearn.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Longhouse, the weekly show for the sensible centrist. It's another week. Time flies incredibly fast for me right now. What about you, Ludwig Path?
Yeah, same for me. It's almost shockingly. This is what it's like to be an adult. It's first 30 years are going by slow, and the next ones are just going to be compressed into 10 years.
Exactly.
At least that's what it feels like. But anyway, yeah, good evening, Euros, and good morning, Ameros, I assume. If we have some people in other time zones, I'm not exactly sure where how to address it, but I guess appreciate the people who have shown up. So, well, today, I guess we could just dive right into the topics without too much further ado. We have there's certain things that I wanted to go through that's been in the news cycle recently, or at least in the kind of Twitter talk space.
You've rounded up a couple of things that caught your eye, and we're going to have a look at the article about online dating that we mentioned last week as well.
Yes, the what is that guy's nuance pill? Isn't that what it's called on Twitter?
I think he's called Nuance Pill on Substack, and he is Nuance Enjoyer or something on Twitter.
Something much needed, yeah. So it's a bit of a counterweight to the whole math gang. It sounds really esoteric, but we'll get into it. It's familiar territory, I think, for Longhouse watchers. But
oh yeah,
I'm just going to share a tab now. Hopefully, it's going to work this time. Okay. Just note as soon as you're getting it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, what's going on in the Twitter space here? Talked about previously. I've been talking about Dan Bilzerian and sort of warning a little bit about the allure of the low IQ anti-Semitism grift that seems to be a kind of like go-to now for washed-up celebrities. The manosphere stuff just kind of isn't enough. It doesn't hit the way that it should. So if you are someone who's fading into irrelevancy and you want to get back on top again, it's doing the anti-SIO grift in the United States is apparently where you should go. I did a poll on my Twitter asking people, if we assume that Donald Trump loses the upcoming election, what will be the future for the GOP after that, right? And of course,
so what's the future if he loses?
Yeah, what's the future if he loses? Of course, there's a question if he wins as well, but that's a little bit further in time. But let's just say the most conclusive thing, he loses in 2024. So, of course, you have the first option of just running him again, because he would most likely be alive. I think it would be pretty insane to do it at that point. I just don't know. But I don't put it past them. Like, they're going to try to run.
I'm not, but considering we have to wait another 4 years, then I mean he isn't young either, right?
No, he's showing signs of aging already, right? And all of the problems that he has now, they're just going to be worse in 4 years. But if nobody else is picking up the energy and there's no other initiative, right? Because GOP currently is just the Trump show. It's really nothing else at this point. Every other candidate's been pushed aside. Like, there's no. If you look at the RNC, for example, there are no previous GOP candidates showing up there.
No, it seems like the RNC is content with sort of riding out Trump, almost.
Yeah. so you have like Trump and a kind of rogues gallery about with people there who a lot of them who hate Trump, but they feel like he's still the path that they can take to get to the White House. And so I mean I see two options for what they can do if Trump loses. Option number one is the vanilla option, is that they basically erase everything that has to do with Trump and just pretend that the last 8 years didn't happen. And they start rolling back to the Mitt Romneys and the kind of Marco Rubios and these type of, let's just say, sensible Republican, fiscally conservative, what do they call them? Value conservative, fiscally conservative, or socially liberal, whatever, something like that. These more kind of administrative types, so they can get back the business interest and some of the other constituencies, what do you call, like the serious hat conservatives that they have lost. That's alternative one. Alternative two is that they're going to have to try to create Trump 2.0. If Trump was the P-800 from Terminator, right?
That, if Trump loses and isn't up for another round, the RNC kind of just resets back to what it was before him.
Yeah, and that's option number one, right? We just forget that Trump ever existed, and then we go back to the business friendly, business friendly Jeb Bush types. But the option number two is that if Trump is the T800, then we have to build the T1000 Trump, and we need to get like a post-truth populist political entrepreneur that's even better, or at least more controllable, that has an audience, and that can appeal to some of the same constituency. And I was rotating some names in my head as to who they could have used. Like Joe Rogan would have been one. I mean, he's not like completely on the anti-woke MAGA train, but he's someone who brings in like a very big audience. So they could just create a platform around him and then just have some handlers in the back. And I was also thinking about like the Paul brothers, Jake Paul and the other guy. They're very young and they have a big, young audience. You can just come and do pranks or just this kind of promo type videos. They might not be mature for the political game yet. I think there's like an age limit of like they have to be 35 or older or something to be president in the United States.
I think so. Yeah, there's something like that. Yeah.
But
so no Baron Trump yet, boys.
No, but then it came to like, okay, they have maybe some other UFC people, Dana White, for example. They could try running because he has that kind of boss energy, charisma. They could try to sell him as a serious candidate. But then I also thought about Dan Bilzerian, because now he's trying to make his way back into the light and to have a sort of more political profile, right? And this has been in the context more or less of these kind of anti-Zionist grifter accounts, like Nick Fuentes would have been one, like Lucas Gage, Jake Shields, Dr. Anastasia Lupus, some of these Muslim people who are just gore posting from Palestine constantly. So like this is where Dan Bilzerian comes in. And I mean, for those of you who are not familiar with him, previously he was known as the king of Instagram, right? When I was in my 20s, then he was the most subscribed to Instagram account for photographing himself living a very lavish lifestyle with women, guns, cars, gambling. It's like this kind of very the young man's dream, essentially. Just kind of living that lifestyle out as much as possible, selling in the idea that he had, made all of his money playing poker and doing smart investments, and that's how he got to that point. Also that he was a Marine, which is sort of partially true. I mean, in reality, he inherited money from his dad, borrowed a lot of money and rented all this stuff, and sort of just created that persona to make money and defrauding investors. Yeah. But now he's back, right? And he's reinvented, and they're rolling out this sort of precedent stuff now. I've seen people talk about it on Twitter, and it's not the first time I've seen this, by the way, because I have, let's see if I can change the I could only find this video on Facebook, by the way, because it's from London Real, the podcast show from Brian Rose, where all of that stuff is removed from YouTube for some reason. I'm wondering if it was had to do with some COVID related stuff. Let's see. I have to get another tab. It's a bit cumbersome.
There we go. Is it showing? Do you see it on your screen? Whoops.
There's no sound. Yeah.
No, hang on. I think we lost you for a moment. Or maybe I'm the one who lost
do you
the
hear
internet. Yeah, I'm back.
Maybe my connection is shoddy. I'll try again.
It's
I'm just
raining and
wondering if there's
storming
no
where I am, so
there's
yeah.
no sound on. There's no sound from the video. I mean,
In the bottom right, maybe.
okay,
Yeah.
we'll try it.
No sound. Yeah.
Besides aliens.
Oh, there it is.
President. That'll probably surprise you.
You don't want to, or you do?
No, I'm going to be president.
You will be.
Yeah, I think so.
Any year in mind?
I gotta make this, multi-billion-dollar business. Do some focus on helping other people out. More philanthropy stuff. And then I think I got a good chance. Yeah, basically run. I should have billions of dollars by that point, and then basically just give the money back. I'd keep like 500 million or something, and then basically cap like the amount that I could spend at like 100, to where like basically I was uncorruptible.
Right.
That would be the premise of my running.
And why be president?
Just because it would be like the last kind of box that I'd want to check. I feel like I could do it, and I feel like if I did it like for pure reasons, like I just really like wanted to do the right thing, which I feel like is not usually the reason why people go into politics, but to actually like, do something correct. I don't know that I would enjoy it.
Yeah, he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, obviously. When he's like, well, okay, I'm just going to make another $1 billion, and then throws it. He never knew what he was talking about. He was just borrowing a bunch of money and throwing it at parties and like Instagram girls and stuff. But he has no idea how to run a business, by the way, or anything else. But now it's like the pure.
I mean, he could probably, with some political advice, right?
Yeah, they have to just give him talking points.
The way he cuts his beard, like I know he does, like the bottom of it to like have that, like the Giga Chad outline, the silhouette. But the way he cuts it, like he cuts it very high on his cheeks, or like on his, I guess the cheekbones. Like it goes very far up in a very strange.
Well, it's called beard sculpting, right? And it's like you said, for men who want to have the Giga Chad look. There are pictures of him without the beard. Let's see if I can find it. Actually, it'll be fun.
He doesn't look bad without a beard. He just looks more normal, right? Anyway, if someone didn't have him mumbling into his beard, that could probably sell better. Is my point.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's nothing wrong with him without the beard. He just looks a lot more normal, but he's trying to imitate that Giga Chad look by sculpting his beard, and like you have to put gel in it to get that fake chin that they get there. I mean, this guy is basically like the male version of Kim Kardashian, right? And you think I'm saying that to sort of be like that's the name that I'm just picking out of the clouds or something, but it's actually more poignant than you think because they're both Armenian. That's actually quite important.
That's true. Yeah.
There are some specific Armenian celebrities in the United States that I can think of off the top of my head. You have the Kim Kardashian family, Dan Bilzerian, and his family. Cher is Armenian, and also System of a Down. I don't know if you have someone I missed there, but generally a sort of vain group in a sense. Uh-huh. I had someone on Twitter basically say that they are like Jews but dumber,
Yeah.
I mean, he was recently on Patrick Bet-David's show. He's made appearances now both on Patrick Bet-David, where he was just talking about the standard, okay, I'm done with my life with women and stuff, and now we're gonna talk about real politics stuff that I care about, which is why Israel sucks, right?
Which I've always cared about, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, it was a very fascinating interview for the people who want to watch it, because it's. I mean, I think I've talked about Patrick Bet-David previously. And he's always had this kind of like sucking up the Jews attitude. And he was confronted about it by Dan Bilzerian on the show, where it's like he is not a Jew himself. Like Patrick Bet-David is Iranian, and he's been subject to bombings and war and stuff like related to what's going on in the Middle East before he came to the United States. But his view is that basically, like the Jews just have all the power, so I have to be a little bit more hush hush. Like I can't, like we can sit and complain, but BlackRock is not going away just because we're doing it at this point, right? So that's just his view. It was very funny just to hear him sort of admit it, at least on the interview. But Dan Bilzerian is there, sort of organically talking about all of these, what do you call like these anti-Zionist talking points that he's learned on Twitter through the last 2 months, which is Talmud quotes. It is, degeneracy from Jews and general like Jewish war crimes and sabotage that he's kind of misunderstood. But I mean, like, I'm not saying he doesn't have any legitimate criticisms. The problem is just that when it's at this extremely low IQ level, it all comes across very fake. If you see what I mean, it's just kind of as a kind of like petty jealousy here. There's something new that I learned in the interview is that Israel does in fact not acknowledge the Armenian genocide, which is apparently has something to do with the relationship that they have with Turkey. But like he's more sort of, he seems like he's coming from the point that he's looking at the Jews as like this more Middle Eastern minority that lives in the United States and is able to grift off their genocide, and he wishes that the Armenians could do the same thing, but they won't even acknowledge their genocide, right? And
all right.
I'm sorry you came on really loud now. I don't know if it's just my mic.
Oh, well, I got some comments in the chat. I think maybe like StreamYard is messing with my volume, so I'm gonna try manually adjusting it. Let me know if it's is it better
now? It's very low.
Now it's very low. Okay, how about now?
A little bit more. See.
How about
say
now?
Something?
Yes, I'm talking. Can you hear me?
Okay, I think that's better for me. Maybe the chat can be the final judge on this.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, just keep talking. I'll check the chat.
But yeah, he's made that appearance. He's also been on Twitter Spaces with Candace Owens, who's been going like full ortho bro, anti-Zionist conspiracy stuff. And the Tate brothers, who have now come out to say that though the Matrix were Jews the whole time. Basically, let's see if I can find the relevant tweet. I think I bookmarked it.
I just want to be very clear to anyone listening that everything we're saying about the people of Israel is quotes by Dan Bilzerian here.
Yes, this is just a PSA about anti-Semitism for educational purposes. It has nothing to do with my opinions. Let's see here.
Attention on Israel for the first time seriously in history.
We got Mr. Tate.
Because they control the matrix. They control narratives. And the problem is the narrative's breaking to the point where they're trying to get TikTok banned because they can't lie anymore. So I'm just asking you as a Jew, do you agree that Israel seems to get a massive free pass for absolutely everything when any other nation state would face severe condemnation for even a half the acts? The reason there's attention on Israel for the first time.
I mean, yeah, the Matrix were Jews the whole time.
Yep.
They've also made these sort of disclaimers that where they're tweeting about, okay, I'm going to get killed for saying this. Are they going to come for me? Which is interesting because the stuff they're saying is stuff that Richard Spencer was talking about, like the early alt-right were talking about in 2014, 2015. Fuentes was talking about in 2016 and up. This is just like standard 4chan stuff that has never been more mainstream than it is now. But they've been running this narrative that, okay, they're probably going to come and get me and kill me for this stuff, which to me it looks like they're basically just setting up a kind of cover story for the Tate brothers because they recently got arrested by the Romanian police in relation to some of these cases they have related to human trafficking.
Yeah.
So they're working like all of these, what I call like the anti-SIO slop accounts. They're very much seem to be cooperating on that narrative on Twitter right now that they're going after the Tates because they named them. right, just the day after or something. Like one day after you talk about Jews on Candace Owens Spaces, like the Romanian police show up with riot gear to take you away. I mean, I just find it a little silly considering the amount of this stuff that I'm just exposed to every day. And I don't really know. I don't know how much they give a shit about anti-Semitism in Romania. To be honest, I imagine like this is like every other Romanian's opinion behind closed doors or something.
Probably, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is a sort of thing that it will be interesting to follow up on. I don't know about like the prospects of Dan Bilzerian being president, because he seems to be a bit of a charisma vacuum, which is a problem that I see with a lot of millennials, I think, in general, like the same with Vance and politicians that come in from our generation, more or less. They don't have the comfortable presence on screen that the boomers have. I don't know if you can relate to that, but they seem to just be a little bit more reserved, a bit slower, a bit kind of less animated, I would say. And because of it, their flaws just become a lot more apparent. It's going to be very hard to find someone with Trump energy in our generation that has, because I mean, I thought about it. Trump is really an exception to everything. Like if this guy had ran for president, I would have never even considered it a serious thing, because I know about the past that he has. I know that he's just sort of a scammer and has a past of just being completely insincere. But with Trump, I'm more willing to look past that. I know he has like a similar stories in his past of various scams that he's run and these things, but it doesn't bother me as much because of the counterweight of the charisma that he brings, in a sense.
Sure.
But with someone like him, if he's just sitting there oohing and eyeing, and it's like, I don't know, it feels too familiar. It's too transparently
If
fake
you're going
for
to be a shyster, you should at least be good at it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, a little bit more carnival there. It's just it's not carnival enough. It's just too kind of, it's just a little bit too boring. But I don't know about like the Zoomers and the stuff that's going on there. Like
they might enjoy this more than we are. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is that there's so many entertainers out there right now where I just don't understand who the audience is supposed to be. Like say like Jordan Peterson, for example. Not the Jordan Peterson from 2016 or 2018, where he was just doing like this Disney movie reviews and talking against compelled speech on campuses
or whatever. Yeah.
Where he was just doing like this simple pull yourself up by the bootstraps, young man, here's some Disney archetype stuff. But now I was listening to his interview on Joe Rogan. He sounds like he's just in a total like drug haze constantly, and he's just waffling on and on and on and on about
that's
this.
Been going for a long time, to be honest.
Yeah, this Old Testament Exodus stuff that is just kind of turned into this hamburger of every like weird idea that he has, and he's just, it never stops. It's just like this talking. It sounds AI generated to me when I'm listening to him.
I was going to say it's either AI generated or he's like an actual prophet. We just don't know it yet.
Yeah, I'm just not getting it here. But the viewership is up. Like if you look at his viewer numbers on YouTube and on everywhere else, they are up compared to where he used to be. He seems to have more people, more eyeballs, at least from what I can see on the metrics. I don't know about people still are showing up to his like his shows the way he used to. I mean, I went to one of them, right? So I knew that he had a lot of fans at that time. I'm just curious as to how many of them have stuck around, because I think his new kind of shtick with this more kind of geopolitics, fake Christian stuff, it's just so hokey and weird that I just don't understand who the audience is, but they seem to be there. So that's why I'm just not a very good judge of these things. But
I mean, it might be that Peterson specifically still speaks in a way that moves people, right? I mean, he's certainly gotten a lot more sort of, as you mentioned, Old Testament. Like he's gotten a lot more fiery in his talking. It's just that individually, the things he's saying doesn't really make sense. He's just sort of arguing on vibes.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if it's the Christian audience, which is what seems to have been happening, is that when the internet was new, all of the Christians were offline, but now they're all online. Yeah. And they're all watching.
So maybe, 100 years from now, Prophet Peterson like ayahuasca and discovered God or something, right?
Yeah. We'll uncover the things. So that's what I'm thinking about, like the future of the GOP, if they're going to try to run somebody like him and do sort of a anti-Zionist kayfabe thing. like they're doing in Russian politics, more or less. Like they pretend that they're anti-Israel or something, but even though all of the people behind they're actually Jewish and they're going to keep funding the Jewish project, but they're putting it more out as a kind of release valve for all of the young anti-Zionist voters. Because I thought that was going to be the Democrats who were going to try to go for the anti-Zionist market, but actually now it seems more like the next role of Republicans, because like Dan Bilzerian is like very Trump oriented. Like he only wants to vote Republican, even though they're more pro-Zionist, right, than the Democrats.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit.
If you want to be anti-Zionist, you can vote for AOC, right?
Well, I mean, at least it's a little bit closer. They're still super pro-Israel, but they're sort of allow to have like a small group of more anti or Israel critical people inside of the party. In the Republican Party, they're talking about deporting them, like the sort of deporting people who support Hamas. And I'm not even kidding. That was in like I saw like this kind of a placard of the new Republican goals for 2024, 2025. And like one of the last points was, okay, we're gonna deport Hamas supporters. Like if you, it's like it's in Florida. If you're at all critical of Israel, we're not gonna allow it. So in the Democrat Party, at least they sort of allow this kind of small contingent of people who are wearing hijabs and are at least giving a little bit of red meat to the Palestine crowd. But yeah, I think that's.
We'll see how that shakes out if we get a Kamala government in the U.S.
Yeah, we certainly will. But I mean,
they're going to go more anti-Zionist, right?
But I mean, say someone like Obama, for example, he was not liked by Benjamin Netanyahu. There's all of these that you could see photographs of it where he's traveling down to Israel and he's not met at the tarmac by anybody. He's just left there to stand by himself because they didn't like him. He didn't feel like he was enough on point with just giving them everything they wanted. So, I mean, I think like if you're looking for presidents who were sort of slightly Israel critical, I think Obama is actually pretty high up there, even though you might dislike other things on his policy. But yeah, the Democrat Party in general is just, I think they're just better on that than the Republicans. And if that's the only issue you have, it's a little bit weird to just go full MAGA. But it's the anti-woke mind virus again that are consuming people's brains. So I just put these tweets here. You have Jake Shields coming up and saying, Andrew, Tristan Tate were arrested again 48 hours after naming the Matrix. They've been held for 9 months without being brought to trial. A new arrest allows them to hold in jail for another 6 months with no charges. So, well, there are actually charges. There's a lot to look into in terms of these, in terms of the cases against them, but we'll just have to see how that pans out. So, I mean, while we're at election-related topics, I wanted to just go back to the RFK Jr. Joe Rogan thing, because there's been certain developments now. There's been, I mean, it looks like RFK. If I were to believe some of the people in the rightosphere, like Alex Jones, which you have to do with like a huge, just fistful of salt, that tomorrow RFK Jr. is going to come out and endorse Trump and just quit his campaign. Completely endorse Trump. That's what they're saying. At least that's what Pasibic and Alex Jones are saying. Mm-hmm. Not very accurate sources of information, so I'm looking forward to see if it's true. But I wanted to kind of re-examine the idea of like the independent voter, right? So you imagine like you have the culture war going on, the registered Democrats, and you have the registered Republicans, but the people who do actually decide these elections in the United States are the independents, who for some reason are not in either of these, locked into either of these camps, and they care about some third issue, perhaps, where they'll just evaluate the people, or there are other factors that are causing them to vote. And in more of my kind of rightoid brain, I've always conceptualized these people as just being moved by Saturn, basically, like it's some kind of planetary movements, or like the weather, or some kind of strange things that are making these people choose to let's say to just vote based on the day, or like this. It was hard for me to understand. But if we look at, say, Joe Rogan as a quote unquote independent, who was a little bit a fan of Bernie Sanders, and he likes a little bit of Trump and a little bit of that, and he's more of a libertarian type who, like, he wants to keep his money from his show, but he also cares about some social justice issues. So it's clear that he doesn't fit into kind of die-hard red-blue dichotomy there. And he will probably just vote red or blue based on, or even like a third candidate just based on whatever his value platform is at that point. And like Joe Rogan is a relatively high resource, smart individual. And so I started to think back to other influencers that I could think of. And I remember watching Eli, the computer guy, in 2020 after the election, where he sort of explained that he had voted for Biden. And I sort of couldn't believe it, because he's a sort of, okay, you have a white man that does computer training videos and has his own business. So you think naturally he falls into the red camp. But he sort of explained like his voting record, just so people understand it here. It's he voted for John McCain against Barack Obama. He voted for Mitt Romney against Barack Obama a second time. He voted for Trump the first time. And then the second, for re-election, he voted for Biden, with the reasoning that he basically thought Trump was a disaster on competency grounds, and that his handling of the pandemic and the rioting was a disaster, and that he didn't think that
he thought Biden would be better.
He basically thought,
Biden was already like, I mean, I know the meme is that, or the thing is that, you know, now everyone agrees that Biden is like senile, but he was showing clear signs already back in 2020.
Yeah, right? I've rewatched a lot of the tapes. He was not that bad back in 2020. I mean,
no, but when he did have his episodes, he was quite bad, and they were happening in 2020.
You can find those compilations for sure, but the sort of like, if you're just watching his whole speeches at that time, it's sort of sometimes you notice it, but it was not bad enough as the way it was in the last debate, where he just looks like he's just completely glazed over, and you know, the lights are on but there's nobody home type. Right. Look, so I mean, it has progressed worse, but you can still see that it was bad. And like Eli, the computer guy, his reasoning was basically that Biden would be able to do more kind of bipartisan stuff, which he was right about. He was able to pass more bipartisan legislation to solve these problems, as opposed to Trump, who was really not a bipartisan candidate at all. But that seems to be okay. So we have two people now, and you know, a third guy that I've started watching, you know, Ryan Macbeth on YouTube, who's like a former Army intelligence guy who does videos about you know, how to detect disinformation trolls on Twitter, and then sort of Army related strategy stuff. He's also an independent, right? And I'm starting to think about specific things that is just happening on the right wing, that's just sort of pissing off independents completely, or just as a sort of total turnoff for anybody who's let's just say on the independent side of the political spectrum, the people who are actually going to decide the election. And like, there's a reason that I have Roeg Nationalist here as an example, because I mean, I'm sure Roeg Nationalist, he's a nice guy in real life or whatever. I have nothing personal against him. But I mean, over time, I have soured incredibly on his persona and his message, and like the general values that are being put out by him and that kind of sphere around him, which includes JD Vance, to be quite frank. So I'll just give you one example, right? That's a problem, I guess, with MAGA and some of these the people in these spheres, which would be a sort of contempt for the army. That's the sort of thing that I think independents pick up on, that is sort of, it's just kind of like an extremely kind of ick factor thing, which is I mean, I can't explain it in any other way, but it's like, oh, look at this, look at the picture. That's something like Jack Posobiec would put up. Oh look, is this really our army? And they would have like a picture, and there's like a black guy there, and maybe there's like a lesbian with blue hair or something. And or you have like Trump who's making comments about soldiers.
We need to defund our armies right now. Yeah.
But it's not that they want to defund the armies, but there's kind of like the idea that it's they like masculinity, and they like the theater of masculinity, but it's also the idea that being in the army is not really that cool. It's kind of gay to be a soldier and to go fight and to be shot at, right? And wait, like Roeg Nationalist,
you think that, or that they think that?
No, they think that. It's you know, I'll just play you a clip where Trump was doing like this kind of it was more like, what do you call, like this I hesitate to call it a Jewish event, but that's pretty much what it was, as a sort of fundraiser thing. Let's see if we can get sound here. So he's standing with our favorite flag here in the background. And just listen to this. If you want to, like, if you're in doubt about this, what I'm talking about, this sort of contempt for soldiers, just listen to this one.
Say, Miriam, I watched Sheldon sitting so proud in the White House when we gave Miriam the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's the highest award you can get as a civilian. It's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor, but civilian version. It's actually much better because everyone gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's soldiers. They're either in very bad shape because they've been hit so many times by bullets, or they're dead. She gets it, and she's a healthy, beautiful woman. It's
What the fuck does that even mean?
I have to say, Miriam.
So this is,
That's
I mean,
that's an oof.
for context, right? This Miriam Adon is the wife of Sheldon Adelson, who has passed on. Sheldon Adelson is like a Jewish, casino billionaire, who is like one of the biggest donors to Trump, and he is like a more of a one-issue voter, which is Israel, right? And after he died, then his wife took over his estate, and has continued to be one of Trump's biggest donors.
Jewish casino owner is putting all his shekels behind Trump.
Yeah, and
it sounds like I'm making it up, right?
and Miriam Adelson is getting the presidential Medal of Freedom, right, which they typically give to people who have done special things. I mean, you can look at Wikipedia. There's a pretty long list of people who get it for different reasons, but usually it's some kind of achievement that they've done, whether it's in science or sports or either some kind of political thing, some kind of civil rights oriented thing. But Sheldon Adelson is basically, she got the medal for giving Trump money so he could spend that money on Israel. And what he's saying in that speech is that, well, this medal is actually better than the Medal of Honor because he didn't have to get shot to get it or something. It's like these sort of comments, the suckers and losers, and he made certain comments towards John McCain as well, where it's sort of like, well, being a kind of meat bag that's shot at, it's not really as cool as being a Jewish billionaire who has casinos, right? And
but do you think to Trump, like, he values sort of his world, sort of the business acumen, the wheeling and dealing, he sees that as more masculine than being someone who takes orders in a hierarchical structure, right?
Yeah, I think
you
so.
see some of that in like the Andrew Tates and stuff. It's this, one man is an island sort of ultra liberal capitalism sort of approach to masculinity, like this American Psycho kind of
perfect.
masculinity.
Perfect. I'm glad you said that. It's like the American psycho masculinity that is on full display here. I mean, Trump was drafted and he got out of it because he had it's probably bullshit, right? They claim he had some problems with bone spurs in his feet or something, just to get out of Vietnam, I think. And he's making disparaging comments. And if you are like an army guy, I mean, I know that there are some of them that are just like, say that like they're hardline anti-woke or something, but if you're not completely sold in on the red team, blue team stuff, and you're sort of an independent person who's like an army vet or something, and you hear stuff like this, it's extremely off-putting. Like I can't even imagine anything more kind of off-putting than this. And like, I mean, with Roig Nationalist, you see a lot of the same sentiment there. It's the kind of he's moaning a lot about, especially like Ukrainian recruits that are like in their 40s or something, that they shouldn't be in the army. They should be at home fishing or whatever. That's his attitude. Like
Joe Rogan.
No, that's Roig Nationalist. I think you can find a lot of his tweets where he's sort of moaning about 45-year-olds being recruited to the Ukrainian army to be on the front lines. It's like, oh, these old men, they should be at home fishing or whatever. It's like it's a problem to recruit boomers and Gen Xers to the army to defend their own countries or whatever. But it's like this kind of gay, very kind of anti-military, while at the same time being masculine. And with Roig Nationalist, it's kind of a double combo there, because he's not only anti-soldier and sort of anti-warrior, but he's also anti-family. But it's very much about this kind of Longhouse meme where, oh, look how Longhouse this guy is. It's like, oh, Matt Walsh, you're a Longhouse, meaning that he's pussy whipped, right? Because he's posting pictures of himself grilling, right, with his family. He has like 4 kids, and maybe his wife is a little bit on the bigger side.
sort of the Nietzschean right guys then.
Yeah,
that-
I just
that you're
don't know
targeting here.
how Nietzschean they are. I think it's very much last man stuff, honestly, when you look at it,
Okay,
because
sure.
I mean, Roy Nationalist was doxxed, right? And it turns out that he doesn't have a family of his own. He lives with his mother, right? And
Right.
what he does is like post this kind of stuff when he works out. So it's like your life should then be about optimizing your morning routine for testosterone, getting a cucumber face mask, tanning your balls for testosterone, like cleaning out the endocrine system from toxins, and eating like good, health food, eggs, for example, and doing squats and like posting physique pics, not having a family, not joining the army or anything like that. Like, it's not Nietzschean. This is like,
Yeah, I don't jive with that. I mean, I know our podcast is called The Longhouse, but
yeah,
as an Evola enjoyer, I do think there is something greater in the hierarchy, right? In creating structures that go beyond the individual. And
but-
that's when humanity has been greatest.
yeah,
So
yeah.
rejecting that, I mean, while it is important to have sort of wild card men, you can't build a counterculture on that, I think.
Well, I mean, to me, it's doesn't make me think of Nietzsche. It makes me think of the John Calhoun mouse utopia experiment, where they cram all these sort of mice in, and they,
Half of
he
them become
registered
gay,
that
and you have like a couple who just become like
yeah.
violent. Yeah.
You have some like what do you call, like the pretty mice, right? Who just
Yeah.
go off to the side and groom themselves, right? And that's kind of what's being encouraged. Again, you shouldn't
Okay,
have
yeah,
family
sure.
or be in the just groom yourself and go online and make fun of other people. Like make fun of he was doing recently where the DNC is happening currently, right? And they're having all of the Democrat super politicians speaking there in this kind of insanely blue arena, but they're sort of picking on. They're laughing at a guy with what's it called, that Walter Jr. from Breaking Bad, that kind of ALS or something, the neurological degenerative disease that he has.
Yeah.
So they had a speaker with sort of some kind of neurological degenerative disease who was like, I'm voting for her, and they're the raw egg was making fun of him, and then they're making fun of the son of Tim Walz, who was like crying at a speech where he has some kind of weird disability stuff, and so that's what they're doing. There are these men who are sort of just sitting there grooming themselves and bodybuilding. They're not having families, not going in the army and fighting, and they're just sitting there kind of mocking people from the internet. And it's like, and there's the reason that I've soured so much on these people. Not only that they're kind of completely turning off any people who are on the independent side of this thing, but it's like this is just last man shit. Honestly, if you have archaeologists that are looking back at records to sort of see, what was the fall of Western civilization, it's not going to be the homosexual with blue hair in the army. It's going to be guys like Raw Egg, who were like, what the fuck were they even doing? They were just sitting and complaining about stuff while just grooming themselves and doing fuck all. That's just kind of my take
Consuming resources,
on
I
those.
guess.
Yeah, just sort of they're just sitting and consuming resources and just complaining about stuff and making a living writing magazines, like trying to dunk on. Like, I mean, this. I'm sorry if our audience
if
are in
you
this
believe
group,
that
but,
it's truly over, right? Just trying to devil's advocate for a moment.
Yeah,
then
okay.
That's kind of all you can do, right?
I see the point, but that would be more of a sign of the decline than it's not aristocratic.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
it is in some bizarre sense if you think about like that you're such a badass that you've subjugated all of your all of the farmers to sit and build stuff for you,
you
or sit and
subjugated
fix
your
your
mom
food.
to make attendees,
But you're
so.
this it doesn't count to live on the dole and subjugating your mom.
Yeah.
This is not Nietzschean. I'm sorry. So we're approaching
You have to
the
push
last
a bit if we're gonna do the e-dating. Yeah.
the last topic here. So, well, recently there's been an event where Putin is now offering kind of sanctuary visas to ideological refugees, so people who are fleeing from neoliberal values in the West. So he signed a decree now, just reading off, aimed at facilitating relocation to Russia of individuals who support traditional values and oppose neoliberal ideals. So
I saw on Twitter one of the guys who tend to pop up on that stuff. He was like posting from like a hair salon about like how you can now just get visas and in Russia, come here and kiss Russian bride, right?
Yeah, you can get your state-mandated Russian GF as well. But I mean, this is a kind of an interesting thing because I feel like this creates a dilemma, right? And a dilemma in the dictionary, this is basically a situation where there are no good ways out. And not for me, but for a lot of these people who have been puffing up Russia and puffing up Eurasianism in the British dissident right, especially. I mean, we've seen a lot of that now with the riots. It seems like some of these influencers have just taken every chance they can to praise Russia while they're at the same time complaining about being ritually humiliated every day. And the people in the American, would you call the American dissident right, the more of the other TRS types who are also praising Russia. So there are people who are sort of complaining about they're living in the police state, they're being ritually humiliated, they're in an economic zone, the degeneration of society, they're in like the end times, right? And complaining, praising Russia. And then Putin shows up with the red carpet and says, here you can come to Russia and surpass and just move past all of the paperwork to become a Russian citizen, because it's actually quite complicated. If you're going to be naturalized as a Russian citizen, you need to pass a language test, which is challenging. I think for an adult English-speaking man to learn the Russian language and to learn Cyrillic, I think it would be difficult for anybody, but especially if you're not used to that. I think it's going to take a lot of work. You need to do a Russian history test, and there's sort of other background checks that they have to do to get you into the system. Otherwise, you'd have to marry into Russia. Or I guess if they also have exceptions, like if you're like a sports star, or if you spent enough money or something and invested a lot in Russia, they'll give citizenships to people who have very large investments. But now you can just bypass that and say that, I'm tired of gay pride, right? And I can just come in and live here for a couple of months and then have the possibility of doing that. But the dilemma that's created here is that, let's say that for the people who are saying yes, and they end up for some reason living in Russia or having permanent residency in Russia, and they can probably keep doing their influencer gig from there. They just bring their laptops and they can keep talking about how the West is, the West is dying from Russia. But then they become more like,
come over here, but we have to take your laptop away.
but then they would become kind of like Ein Miles Chung in a sense. There would be a kind of level of seriousness about what they're doing. That's kind of it's a little bit undermined by the fact that they're not actually living in the West. If people know that they're living in Russia currently and they're only talking about how awful the West is, and they're not even living there, and they never talk about Russia, which none of them do, by the way. I mean, I've been watching a lot of accounts from people who've moved to Russia for these specific reasons, right? And generally, you get very little detail. That's what I've noticed about what's actually going on in Russia. They just like
how it's like living in Russia.
Yeah, what it's like living there. It's very basic stuff. Like, well, I can get my toothpaste and toothbrush, and we can get some decent food, and I have like a teaching job or whatever. But there's very little about what's actually going on there. They generally they talk about some basic stuff that's easier and that's better there, and they don't have to deal with pride, and they just go on to slamming the West. Like one guy, I think the channel is called Russia, the American Dream or something. He just talks about like how much he hates the CIA and the IRS and stuff on all of these videos, even though he's living on the other side of the world. So, but let's say that you are, just for example, you've argued that Russia is the ascendant civilization. There's many people who argue that from this kind of Spenglerian point of view. You have people who argue that BRICS is going to be the new premier economic alliance of the future. They think the US dollar hegemony is going to collapse. They think that Russia is now currently militarily dominant over the West. And they think the Western elites are ontologically evil. They think, Russia and the kind of this bloc is the emerging economic superpower, that their economy is just growing like nothing else, while our economy is failing. You think about Vladimir Putin as a sort of inspiring, pragmatic, civilizational leader. You think that there's basically no difference in the West and in Russia in terms of freedom of speech and civil liberties because it's all equally oppressive. And you think that Russia is more affordable in the West. What exact reasons do you have for declining this offer? I cannot think of many. When I think of a lot of the influencers who are pushing these narratives in the right-wing spaces, what's the reason that they aren't going? I don't know. I can't think of a single reason. They're basically this is like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Like you're getting the golden ticket with your chocolate, and you can go to the chocolate factory, and then you choose not to go to the chocolate factory.
Right.
Which is something that, as long as this option is open, I'm going to be keeping tabs on how many of these people who are pushing these narratives who are actually going to it. Because in my mind, if I had genuinely been pushing these narratives and actually believed in this, I just go straight away. I don't know what's holding these people back.
Yeah.
But again, I have a little screenshot here from Alex Jones' account, because he was one of the people who were promoting this. Like, he's promoting moving to Russia to his followers. And the first response comment is like from Dr. Ian Garner here. Yes, please move to Russia. You'll love all that freedom. And Alex Jones responds, no.
No.
It's just no. There's just no follow-up here. And I feel like that it kind of speaks volumes of these people. And so that's the other part of the dilemma, is that they choose not to go. And it kind of undermines all of their narratives in a sense. So how much can you keep running all these narratives about how like Russia is the winning team globally and not want to be a part of that and just be a part of the sinking rat ship that is the West?
Saeed Olof Ors says it's going to be like those leftists who said they would move to Canada when Trump got elected. Are we going to get I'm going to move to Russia if Kamala gets elected?
Yeah, well, they can go. You can just write that on the visa application, right? The reason for leaving Kamala communism or something. But yeah, I think we'll just revisit that. I've talked enough. So we need the time to talk about the dating stuff. But I just think this is an interesting thing. I'll have to revisit this maybe in 2 weeks. I'll try to keep tabs on how many of the people in the dissident right sphere, especially the British one, who have actually moved to Russia. And it's going to be more funny for me every month that we go where they're not going. It's I mean, for me, I take that as a W in my favor. But yeah, there's a lot of selection bias going on.
Answering it. Let's get something straight. I think we've answered this before. Maximus Aquilas says, "Does Ludik unilaterally support Ukraine, or is he neutral?"
No, I support Ukraine.
All right. Let's see here. So we have an article. We mentioned this at the top of the hour. We had an article from someone who calls themselves Nuance Pill on Substack. Please check that out if you want. Going off of his other articles, he seems to either work with statistics or have a background with statistics in the way that he works, some kind of academia most likely. And most of the stuff I'll just show real quick here. There's some like AI generated images, but mostly he posts a lot about stats on dating and generally trying to I guess tip the scales a bit against the prevailing narratives about online dating. And he's made sort of one big article here that is titled, "Have Dating Apps Really Ruined the Dating Landscape?" Which I think was interesting because, as the subtitle says, he's challenging popular narratives around online dating. And so he's going to throw a lot of numbers at us. I'm not 110% convinced because there might be sort of things hiding in between the numbers he shows us. But considering how much sort of truisms there are in the culture about what dating is really like, using apps and stuff like that, I'm willing to sort of let that slide just to have a counter argument.
Yes,
so I'm
because
just gonna
I mean the standard view then on this is the whole math view, right? For the people who are not that familiar, I assume that if you're in these spaces, you've seen that before, the way they put these graphs up where it's like the Giga Chad market or something. Or the incel wiki theories, where it's what is it, like 10% of the men get 80% of the women. That's the kind of standard right-wing narrative as to why society is going to shit basically because women have too much choice with the combination of the technologies, like with the dating apps and the rights that they're given, and plus the contraceptive technologies. That is kind of the manosphere narrative.
And what gets
so
pulled up usually is that graph from what's the one of the like original dating sites? I can't remember. It's an old sort of graph that shows that women are much more ruthless in their selection online than the men are.
Yeah, the men just click on everything, right? And the women are just sitting there with like 100 matches and they're picking maybe one guy out or something. But I mean, that's the sort of standard narrative, but this guy has a bit of a different view on how this pans out.
Exactly. So I'm just going to read and you can interrupt me if you have anything you want to say. A narrative once relegated to obscure incel forum has officially hit the mainstream, being disseminated through CNN, Real Time with Bill Maher, Breaking Points, and so on to millions of people. It has even begun to be promoted by prominent scholars such as Jonathan Haidt and made its way into academic journals. Blake and Brooks, 2023, Linher, Larson and Kinnair, 2024. Larson and Kinnair described the situation thusly, quote, sex differences in mate preferences empower women in short-term markets, giving them practically unlimited access to casual sex with higher value men. Bush and Schmidt, 2011. Less restrained by monogamous mating morality and given access to larger, more accessible short-term markets through technologies like Tinder, many women can serially date the small percentage of men whom they perceive to be the most attractive. End quote. So what is the basis for this ever-pervasive meme? Basically, the observation that women receive much more attention and practice much more selectively in online dating. This much is undeniable, though is extrapolating from this to an infinite conveyor belt of chads being delivered to every woman's doorstep on demand justified. Now I'm going to editorialize here for a moment and say that I think, I would show this guy the yellow card for kind of straw manning, because I don't think necessarily the argument from the people he's talking about here is that, but it gets extrapolated in the sort of truism of the culture at large, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I just
there's
give him a
still
warning, right? You're sort of like attacking a bit of a straw man here, but I understand where he's going with it.
Yeah.
There's no way that this idea could be so widespread and taken seriously by seemingly intelligent people if it were completely unfounded, is there? Actual outcomes. The argument tends to revolve around imbalanced swipe rates, but the truth is that they offer little insight into how many men and women are actually matching, conversing, and arranging a date, and then having anything meaningful come of it. Luckily, there exists a good deal of data with the capacity to test this hypothesis, even if it has received little to no attention. The Chadopoly hypothesis, of course, predicts that we should see more women than heterosexual men who have dated and had sex through dating apps. Are they really funneling 80% of the women to the top 20% of men, as black-pilled incel Shuon Head asserts in the Breaking Points interview? Let's cut to the chase and look at what the actual outcome data says. One of these is actually a chart found in the same article, including the one we've all seen, showing the average women swiping right on only 5% of profiles on Tinder. It depicts the share of millennials who'd meet up with someone through Tinder before, about 20% of women and 21% of men. So here's how often do millennials meet up from Tinder. And the question is, have you ever met up with someone off Tinder? And then we have the male blue for yes, the red for no, and then I don't use Tinder at about, that seems to be about 30%, maybe 25% of men and 30% of women don't use Tinder in this questionnaire. And they seem to be meeting up about the same. A large nationally representative U.S. survey, the National Survey of Family Growth, included in the 27 to 19 survey the following question, quote, in the past 12 months, have you had sex with anyone you first met using a dating or hookup website or mobile app? I'd be interested to see if that has changed after the pandemic. Just curiosity.
One would think this gets worse, right? Especially if everybody's locked inside and you can't, go to clubs or public meeting spaces at all. So people just use these apps to meet each other at their houses and lube up with anti-bac or something.
Maybe. Among the heterosexuals aged 18 to 35, 7.5% of men and 6% of women responded yes, not a statistically significant difference. And we see that online dating facilitates sex a lot more for queer folks, likely due to having more incentive to turn to apps to expand their dating pool, and at least in the case of men, simply doing what many heterosexual men would be doing if they could. So here you can see proportion of people who had sex in the past year with someone they first met through a dating app or website. And you can see that over 50% of homosexuals and above 20%, almost 25% of bisexuals are sort of meeting and having sexual intercourse through apps, while about, like you mentioned it, about like 7-8% of men and women who are heterosexual actually use the dating apps for sex.
This is what we call the gay lifestyle, folks. I mean, you're seeing it in the statistics.
You're seeing
here.
it in the numbers,
This is
which
where,
is an insane number, right?
yeah,
I mean, just I know this is percentages, but this has to sort of like account for real numbers as well, right?
This is where mpox comes from.
Right. The new coof. Another survey, the American Perspective survey in 2020, asked people if they'd use online dating, and if so, whether they'd been on a date through it. Among heterosexuals aged 18 to 35, of the 52% of men and 39% of women had used online dating, 62% of men and 71% of women had been on a date through it, and 32 and 28% of women overall. So this is just, have you dated someone through online dating services? And again, now for dating, it goes up on the heterosexual, but the homosexuals and the bisexuals are still in the lead. Another American Perspective survey conducted in 2022 found that among heterosexuals aged 18 to 35, of the 30% of men and 26% of women had used online dating, 65 of men and 76 of women had been on a date, and for 20% of men and 20% of women overall. So here's another one who have dated someone through online dating. Another source, again, the stats are about, it's showing the same thing, that the homosexuals and the bisexuals are engaging with a lot more people through the dating apps than heterosexuals. Using the raw data provided by Blanc et al., which employ a large sample of Spaniards aged 18 to 35, I found that of the 43.1% of heterosexual men and 23.5% of heterosexual women who'd use a dating app, 41.8% of men and 54.4% of women had had vaginal or anal sex through this app, for the 18% of men and 12% of women overall. And again, who has literally had intercourse through the app? The numbers are about the same, with an incredible overrepresentation of homosexuals.
It doesn't sound too good, but they're saying that they're doing it through the app. I don't
well,
know
not through the app, but the app ending ultimately in vaginal or anal sex, I think, is the
that's understandable. It's just something funny about the phrasing. Also, I mean, there's so many percent here. It's kind of hard to keep track of.
Yeah.
At the same time, you probably need a calculator or something.
Well, I mean, we're talking percentages of percentages, right?
Yeah.
According to a survey conducted by YouGov and BBC Newsbeat in 2018, let's see here. I'm just gonna bring that up here. 49% of males and 41% of females between 8 of 16 34. 66% of males and 71% of females had never gone on a date through online dating, for 30% and 30% of females overall. So males and females also had a slightly similar distribution of number of first dates through online dating in the past year. So it doesn't seem like there's any noticeably stronger skew within men either. So the graph becomes, how many dates are people having through online dating? So this is the number of first dates through dating apps or websites in the past year. So for about 30% of the population, it's like nothing, right? Or maybe that's 60 I'm not sure if we're getting into like how he did the math, but are we adding the none in the past year and none ever, or is that cumulative? I'm not sure.
Just go with it. It gets a little bit too complicated. We have to try to at least get some high level interpretations out of this.
The point is that actually not a lot of people are having dates, right? About 10% of the population seem to be having, or sort of 10% of the people who have dates have like one, and then for some reason there's a bump back up at like 5 to 9. I think this would be the sort of like the Giga Chad bump, right?
Well, that makes
Like
sense.
this is where the attractive males land, something like that.
But it's not as uneven as I think a lot of the incel wiki types
Maybe
would have you
maybe.
think.
A representative Dutch survey was conducted in 2017 of about 5,000 men and 8,000 women between the ages of 18 to 24. 15% of men and 13% of women had been on a date through online dating in the past 6 months, and 9% of men and 7% of women had had sex through it. Of the 427 men and 687 women between the ages of 25 and 39, 10% of men and 7% of women had been on a date through online dating in the past 6 months, and 7 and 4 had had sex through it. Since this has included all sexual orientations, homosexual men could help explain these discrepancies. So, in this survey, you can see that there's a lot more men represented, which he's saying that maybe that is because it's including homosexual men, skewing the numbers in, I say in favor, but sort of inflating the male numbers on this table. But we're still looking at, about 25% of men use dating sites, 17% use dating sites. I think this is date. My Dutch isn't very good, but I'm pretty sure this is a meetup or something. So 15 and 13% actually meet someone, and then about sub 10%, as with the other numbers, actually end up having sex. A Swiss national survey of young adults aged about 26 was conducted in 2017. Okay, so just listing more numbers here, but the point is that you can see here it comes out 48% of men and 40% of women, 30% for 22.5% of women stated that they'd have sex with someone they met online before, with more men saying that they do it more often. Social desirability bias might be affecting the responses due to the sexual question a bit here, but it's unlikely controlling for it would do much more than reduce the gap. 2021, YouGov surveyed 16% of men and 30% of women had been in one committed relationship through an online dating, and 14% of men and 9% of women had been in more than one committed relationship through online dating. YouGov survey in 2022, 70% of women, 90% of women had met someone in real life through dating apps. Yu et al. 2022 analyzed data from the 2020 Chinese Private Life Survey and says that 19% of males and 70% of females aged 18 to 25 had hooked up with someone they met online. So we're looking at, just broadly across the board, hookup apps or dating apps accounting for about 20% of somewhere between 10 and 20% of heterosexual dating, right? I'm extrapolating a lot here and simplifying it.
Yeah, it seems to make sense from the numbers, but you have to then conclude then that there's a lot of people who just do like nothing then.
Yeah,
because I don't see
exactly.
a very sprawling alternative scene to this. I know some people are able to meet up through work or school or like these sort of standard institutions, but that's been thinning out quite a bit. So, I mean, a lot of I assume that a lot of the the loneliness and the dropping birth rates is just people not meeting each other at all, really.
I do agree, and I said it last week after having read this. My big question is, well, where are the people who aren't dating online going? Because we might be facing sort of like a Japan situation where the sexes basically just stop interacting, right?
Well, yeah, it does seem quite likely, actually, if you are to just extrapolate patterns from, like a high-tech, high-trust society, what happens if they reach a certain level of economic development and certain population curve, then it's kind of just it sort of just freezes a little bit. There's just not that much going on with young people.
Yeah, I have to groom myself. I can't
Yeah,
find a woman.
yes, exactly. I have to clean up my endocrine system from all the microplastics before I can find Stacy.
Are dating apps facilitating, quote, hookup culture? Popular discourse surrounding dating apps tends to frame them as hookup apps, which are contributing to the hookup culture we allegedly inhabit at the expense of long-term relationship formation. Many an article has been written along these lines. Quote, I call it the dating apocalypse, says a woman in New York, aged 29. As the polar ice caps melt and the Earth churns through the sixth extinction, another unprecedented phenomenon is taking place in the realm of sex. Hookup culture, which has been percolating for about 100 years, has collided with dating apps, which have acted like a wayward meteor on the now dinosaur-like rituals of courtship. End quote. Given that the majority of young adults haven't met or had sex with anyone through dating apps, with only a small minority of heterosexuals having had sex with someone they first met online in the past year, this would seem to put a limit on how big this impact on sexual behavior could have been, or can have been. But it's still worth knowing the kind of behavior they're associated with. It is certainly research you can point to which appears to support this narrative, for instance, showing dating app users reporting more sex partners, hookups, STI diagnosis than non-users, this effect being especially strong in more active users, or showing many young adults reporting knowledge of someone who used Tinder to meet extra-dyadic sex partners, or having engaged in infidelity through it themselves. So it seems that the people who are using the dating apps are going sort of harder in the paint, as it were. They're doubling down more. They're having more sex and making up for everyone else.
Yeah, I mean that's usually how it goes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some people who are like hardcore users, and not a lot of room for novices, I guess, in these on these apps. It's kind of like you get into playing an old game or something. If you ever tried that, like say like Call of Duty or these things, when they release a new game, then everybody is playing it. But if you're trying to get into something that's been out on the market for a while, it's only like professionals. It is like semi-pros who've been playing for 5 years, 5-10 years, and there's you're just not in the same place. So, but I've heard complaints about this as well, like with articles of younger people who are saying that there's some people who are just not interested, and other people who are just into really weird stuff and just have like what I would call, like, let's say like niche, sexual interests that makes it a little bit harder to get into.
And they have to turn to the dating apps to find that. Or well, the dating apps allow them to pursue that niche instead of
they do, like they're trying to meet some people, right? And okay, they just wanted to have vanilla relations or something, and they're asking, like the partner's asking to be choked, or weirder stuff like that. That's kind of off-putting, I think, for people who aren't as comfortable with that stuff.
However, we're interested in establishing a casual connection, and research has also shown that dating app users tend to score higher in sociosexuality, or the willingness and desire to engage in uncommitted sexual relations, which is what we were sort of getting at here. Higher in sexual permissiveness and need for sex, higher in risk-taking propensity, higher in extroversion and openness to experience, and lower in conscientiousness, and higher in dark triad traits. They've also found higher health and safety risk-taking propensity and lower sexual disgust sensitivity, but only among the female subsample, maybe due to the average male passing the threshold. Which is interesting, because if you add this to the male, then I guess you just have, I mean, you have like a good recipe for STD sharing, right?
Yeah, that is a concern.
Yeah. Even just the fact that you won't see a married couple who met at a church when they were teenagers on Tinder, at least so you'd hope. Even just the fact that you won't see a married couple who met at a church when they were teenagers on Tinder, or at least so you'd hope, will cause some selection bias. I guess he's missing an it or something. It will cause some selection bias. There are some mixed findings regarding some of these traits. For instance, while one study finds that the big five, and particularly openness, is predictive, while the dark triad isn't, another found the opposite. But the overall picture that this is like the replication thing, right? You just have a bunch of studies who like contradict each other, and no one knows the truth. But the overall picture that emerges is that dating apps tend to select for people who are more short-term oriented on average. We therefore shouldn't be surprised to observe that these same people tend to engage in more promiscuous behavior. So what he's basically getting at is that this isn't necessarily this isn't like a culture thing, I guess is what he's getting at. He's getting at this is just allowing people who are already hardwired to act like this to, again, run it on overdrive.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the data that's extrapolated from this sort of assumes that you take a very specific selection of the population and then you extrapolate that to be the whole population, which is what you're seeing with a lot of these incel doomer accounts in general. I think is that they take.
Yeah, you post videos of like a girl who have like 4 Tinder dates every week to basically just get paid to, or to have her dinners paid, right? And you extrapolate that to mean every woman does this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm seeing so much of it on my timeline. I've tried to, mute a lot of accounts, but I'm still getting it. But they'll put up accounts of porn stars Instagrams who talk about like weird stuff that they're engaged in, and it's sort of implied that like all women are like this or something. Which is, it is the terminal onlineness that creates a lot of the selection bias. It's very, very dangerous, actually, in terms of your own mental health to get too into these niche internet theories.
Yeah, stay safe out there. You got to ward yourself from cognito hazards. Isn't that is that the SCP word or something? One study found that after controlling for age, sex, and socio-sexual desire, the association between length of dating app usage and lifetime casual sex partners vanished. Another found that both men and women women on dating apps male and female dating app use and casual sex was mediated by a more risky sexual script. At the same time, app users don't necessarily display a reduced long-term mating orientation. So it's not the case that dating app users are uninterested in relationships. It's typically the case that casual sex and romantic relationships emerge as similarly strong motivators for men's dating app usage, while women report a significantly lower casual sex motivator. So, but again, a lot of these are polls, and every time there's polls and women involved, I do have a bit of a, chauvinistic trait or sort of voice in the back of my head telling me that they're not telling the truth. So I just like to mention that because these numbers might be a bit skewed.
Treacherous famoids, they're at it again. But I mean, I do. It is sort of my experience with this stuff as well that women are not as interested in the casual stuff, but they get sort of pulled into it anyway. Usually, the strategy is like for a man who's interested in that is to kind of allude to the fact that there will be something more afterward, and then not following up on it. Essentially,
that is a very common sort of stringing
that seems
women
to just
along.
Be the main strategy. There's very little of the like these sort of weird people who do polyamorous relationships or this sort of ethical polyamory stuff. I've just never seen this work long term where this sort of you're just open and honest. Both parties are like, no, I'm just interested in casual sex, and yeah, of course, I'm just going to sign here on this contract and we can get to hotel rooms. Like it's usually just like the guy is interested in something more short term and he has to string women along by just pretending that he's interested. That seems to be like the main dynamic that I've seen.
Yeah. This reflects general patterns in mating orientation. While men are far more short-term oriented than women, women are at most marginally more long-term oriented than men. So does this pan out in regards to outcomes? In Sumter et al., of the 6 motivations, only the love motive significantly positively predicted going on a date through Tinder. The casual sex motive predicted having a one-night stand through Tinder, though this was not a very common outcome of dates. Slightly less than 20% of people had experienced a one-night stand compared to almost half having gone on a date. So a lot of sort of money and resources, I guess, are being poured into dating without ending up, or courtship, let's say, without resulting in partnership, I guess. Is something I'm reading
Yeah.
from this. It's
There's a
not
lot
what
of
he's
people,
saying. I'm just having a thought here.
a lot of people wasting their time with this stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot.
playing games, as it were. Timmermans and Courtois found that some half of the subjects who'd met a Tinder match, 23%, had through at least one night stand, and 31% a casual sexual relationship, and 27% a committed relationship, which is quite similar numbers. I mean, of about half the subject who met a Tinder match, 23% ended in a one-night stand, 31% in a casual sexual relationship, and 27% on a committed relationship. So it splits a bit evenly on where it goes. You're basically rolling the dice then on a 1 in 3 of ending up with a girlfriend, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think it's so hard to map when you're just seeing the numbers data and you don't have any case studies to go along with it, say, other than your own experience, to sort of like, okay, what exactly does this represent in reality when you have this distribution, right? Especially with the casual stuff, because I mean, are we isolating heterosexuals here? Or are we still like doing a full?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd had to go into the source. At least he's good at linking his sources. I would have to go into the source and check.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm taking it at his word. I think he would have mentioned homosexuality if the data in the study was sort of delineated on that.
Yeah, I mean, just for my own sake, I'm really just interested in like heterosexual relationships. I see like homosexual relationships as its own thing entirely. Like as sort of, it's not interesting to look at those two things together as like, oh, it's just relationships in a sense. Like the gays are just gonna do the gay stuff and have that kind of crazy dynamic. But this is really more about like the stability of society,
exactly,
in the long term, and how that is changing.
Since the mean for Tinder facilitated one night stand was about 0.43, we can deduce that most who'd had one had only had the one, meaning that there's only a one night stand per person. Relationship motive predicted offline meetings, but interestingly not committed relationships. Sexual motive predicted one night stands and casual sexual relationships. Et al. Found that dating app matches met in person correlated at 0.21 with the hookup motive and 0.5 with the love motive. It's like I'm backing statistics 101 right now. In a regression model including sensation seeking, love motive, hookup motive, and social desirability and gender, only the love motive significantly predicted having met a dating app match in person. Similarly, Menon 2024 found that unlike the sexual motive, the love and socialization motives positively predicted going on Bumble dates. So what seems to be the thing here is that people are actually more likely to be interested in the person they end up sleeping with. And as you're saying, Ludwig, I think the case is that, a lot of games are being played, a lot of people are being strung along. Because these stats don't necessarily tell us that the love motive is mutual, right?
Nope. But yeah, with Bumble matches, I've never used this. I'm not. Is that like the feminist Tinder or something?
I think it's the one where the women are the one swiping.
Yeah.
But I got lucky. I never had to use them. Like those.
You're not in the statistics. Well, hey, look at that. Like, I mean, I also didn't meet my wife on one of these, but I have used them. So at least I have some familiarity with the dynamics of it.
Gruntwet et al. Found among Tinder users a match to meet-up ratio of 57-1. That's fucking rough. You have to match with 57 women to meet up with one. A meet-up to one-night stand ratio of 5.4-1, which is much better. Like, if you actually get a date with a woman, you have a much better shot of getting in bed with her. And a meet-up to forming a long-term relationship of 5.1-1. But about equal then. So it's about, 1 in 5 chance that you'll end up in bed with her and she becomes your girlfriend.
Well, yeah, they do map onto each other quite well. I don't know if they're overlapping, but
Yeah, I don't know. This would mean that it takes on average around 300 matches for either of these outcomes to occur. Okay, so it's either. Of the 20% of users who had a one-night stand through Tinder, 13% had only had the one, 3% had two, and 4% had more than two. I assume that this is 3% had two different one-night stands, right? And not with the same person. What do you think?
yeah, it seems like that. I'm not entirely sure.
All right. Another interesting finding was that how many one-night stand users had outside of Tinder was only weakly positively correlated with Tinder one-night stands. This correlation actually reversed after controlling for other factors. I do kind of see something with that. Maybe that's a cultural thing, nation to nation kind of stuff, or country to country. But growing up with sort of Tinder making its entry into the dating world, one night stands were much more, it just happens at the party, right? Or you just end up going home together after a party. It's not like you go on Tinder trying to look for a one night stand.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a concept that comes from Tinder. At least people were going, to bars and stuff. They're still doing that, but I thought it was a lot more common before the apps. Is that you had to at least go to some type of meeting place. That is, I don't know what you call it, like an adult, at least some place that serves alcohol or has, dancing music or whatever, and you meet someone and you go home together. Typically, that's mutual understanding that at least you'll find other people there who are there for the same reason.
Of course. And especially, in Norway, the culture is that you start the relationship with the one night stand and then you go on a date, right? Which I know horrifies. Like I remember talking to like an exchange student from like France and Italy and stuff like those countries. Like, they really don't enjoy that. They really want to go on a date first.
Yeah, I mean, it's very weird with Norwegians like that. I don't like this stuff myself, actually, but it's just generally hard to. I don't want to use the word penetrate, but like to let's just say get beyond the social stuff with people. Like, if you want to get into deeper relationships, there's usually going to be alcohol involved. You're quite helpless, I think, with the normal Norwegian person. If you're going in dry, so to speak, so much of it is just kind of
no. You have to. Yeah, you drink, you party together, you drink together, you have the one night stand, and then you go on a date. That's how it goes.
Often that stuff is like arranged. Like, you go to a party and you meet someone's friends or friends of friends or something, and you hit it off, and like you might hook up, at their place or somewhere else where both are inebriated.
Yeah, we're not equipped to raw dog the relationship like that.
And of course, if you want to repeat, then you contact them. But it's not ideal. I can understand why foreigners think this is just completely brutal, but I think it is the case for a lot of people.
It is. While the research on this topic tends to be correlational, there are some studies which may offer some clues as to causality. Garga et al. Found among a music festival goer sample, who you'd expect to engage in more risky behaviors, that only 18% reported an increase in the number of sex partners since using dating apps. Selterman found no difference between dates initiated through dating apps or offline in felt attraction, perceptions of partners as sexy, hot, intelligent, and friendly, likelihood of consuming alcohol, or engaging in sexual activity. Buchanan et al. Analyzed data from the National College Health Assessment Survey, and here we see that the changes in average number of sex partners in the past year split by Greek members of fraternities and sororities and non-Greek undergrads. While there was no observable change among non-Greek students following the introduction of Tinder, Greek students appear to show a minor increase in sex partners. This was interpreted as demonstrating a casual impact since Tinder's launch strategy focused on Greek organizations. So the numbers might actually be, padded essentially. This effect was nothing earth-shattering, however. Greek students had on average 0.22 more sex partners in the past year and were 3.1% more likely to have sex in the past year, changes of less than 0.1 standard deviations. It also didn't seem to continue rising linearly along with the popularity of dating apps. There were increases in the incidence of Greek students being diagnosed or treated for chlamydia in the past year and ever being tested for HIV of 0.6 and 1.6% respectively, or 0.054 standard deviations. Of course, the increase in chlamydia diagnoses could also potentially reflect an increase in testing or unprotected sex, which isn't necessarily connected to an increase in promiscuity. While these effects seem to lend credence to the idea that dating apps are associated with a small increase in promiscuity, at least within the subpopulation already more inclined toward it, a negative effect on relationship status or quality hasn't been detected, so it doesn't seem like it's the result of people foregoing relationships in favor of hookups or situationships. Interestingly, mental health, if anything, improved somewhat for Greek students, and especially for women. This includes eating disorders. This goes against the notion that dating apps are facilitating a mental health crisis, for instance, through causing body image issues or women being lured into sex with the pretense of a relationship before being callously discarded by bad chads. So he's pushing back a bit on what we said, but I don't think we're saying that that's the only thing. Like, I think what he's beating back on here is that this is sort of the only thing that is happening. They also tested whether there was heterogeneity in the effect on sex partners by how many sex partners they were predicted to have, and found that there was a slightly larger effect among the upper quartile of men. It wasn't a zero sum, however, as all quartiles seemed to benefit to a degree. Also, nationally representative US datasets show no indication of an increasing consolidation of mating amongst the most promiscuous men. If anything, they began to underperform in the recent years. Again, lending credence to our thought of maybe people just are having less sex.
Yeah, exactly.
Nor do we see a growing gap in STD rates between men and women, between women and heterosexual men. Well, that's a very specific. We have to specify heterosexual men, which is what we'd expect under the assumption that Chad was monopolizing all the women. Some data for good measure. Monitoring the future shows no increase in 20 to 30 men or women reporting 3 or more sex partners in the past year. So there's no change in the amount of partners on average. Although for men, it seems to have gone down slightly since 2007.
There's a drop, and then it seems to be on the increase again. So I'm not sure exactly what's happening when the beams are crossing here.
Yeah. I'm not sure what happened. It's the American housing crisis really did a number on the dating market. I don't know. What is everyone getting wrong? Many will find this highly counterintuitive. If women are being so much more selective, then how come we don't see any disparity in outcomes? Let's begin with the infamous OkCupid data. That was the one I was mentioning at the top of the article, which has been the source of much indignation over the years. I'm hardly the first one to address this, but since the ratings graph is still routinely posted out of context as evidence for the online dating facilitated Chadopoly narrative, including one of the papers mentioned, let us briefly look at what they do, not at what they say. In a blog post by OkCupid, co-founder Kristen Rudder posted attractiveness rating distributions compared to the message distributions. Both women and men's messages were delivered disproportionately to the higher rated members. If anything, relative to how many men and women were rated low, the low rated men fared better than the women. But this could potentially be explained by a tendency for less attractive women to initiate more conversations due to being less able to sit back and wait for men to reach out to them. The blog post features a graph comparing the messages the top-rated men and the women received relative to the bottom-rated men and women. It showed that men's messaging behavior was more influenced by the attractiveness of women than vice versa. Though to be fair, I'm not sure if this is appropriate when 27% of men were rated a 1 compared to less than 1% of men a 5, while 6% of women were rated a 1 and a 5. Well, this is also part of what the argument here is about, is that men and women rate each other differently. So using these graphs essentially become very hard because you're looking at it through two different lenses. We can see from this graph from Dataclysm, though, that both men and women in the top percentiles received a lot more attention. So here's women and men. So looking in a vacuum, or sort of relatively, the men and the women are equally being sort of bombarded once you reach the 90th or 98th percentile, right? Although it seems to happen a bit earlier for women.
There's a dip for the women there. I'm not sure how to interpret that.
It's the mid valley.
There's the mid. Yes, the mid valley. Oh, that's perfect.
We also see that the average woman received more messages than even the most popular men. Perhaps not too surprising, considering that even in the real world, dates are initiated by men 90% of the time. A common retort is that the comparable effect is simply a product of this. A graph showing reply rates by the sender's attractiveness also shows similar patterns, however. The more attractive men didn't have exponentially more success. So when you're looking at, what men actually are able to do with that attention, it seems that it goes about just as far as for attractive men or attractive women. A number of studies have yielded similar findings. Brucken-Newman 2018 examined messaging activity across a 1-month period on an online dating service. Users' desirability was measured by a combination of the number of messages they received and how many their senders did. The graph below shows messaging behavior as a function of the desirability gap. The most common targets for both genders in terms of the mode were of roughly equal desirability to themselves, though on average, both shoot above their league to a degree. Again, as with OkCupid, we see men sending a lot more and receiving a lot less, but also a comparable effect of desirability on replies received for each gender. Let's see here. Messages sent and replies received for men and women. You can see that this distribution is actually about equal in the top left and right. Although you see here men, again, sending a lot more messages, shooting their shot, as it were, sending, show bobs to the 9 out of 10, even though you don't really have a chance.
Spray and pray, as they say. Yeah.
Yes. Krieger et al. Found, in addition to similar patterns, that the desirability gap narrowed with the more messages that were exchanged, so that most resulting pairings would have been quite homogeneous. It seems that, at least on online dating services in which one is able to send a message without a matching system acting as a barrier, we can see that both men and women are quite discriminating in their decision making, with a comparable hierarchy of desirability within each gender. Of course, men's role as initiators is retained in the online world, and for each level of desirability, women are receiving more attention, but the notion that women can easily date up a lot by just hopping on an online dating service seems questionable. Again, implying that basically all the, what we've got to remind ourselves that this guy is talking against the idea that all the mids are trying to get with Chad, right? And they might be swiping right on Chad, but he's not matching with them, right? That's what's happening here. According to Nuance Pill. An oft-cited example of the male desirability skew comes from a since-deleted Hinge report. The male data was reported in 2 of the papers I cited in the intro, yet female data isn't. Same, of course, with the Incel Wiki. While there might be substantial quote-unquote inequality between the genders, the inequality within each gender isn't that far apart. The top 10% of male profiles receives 58% of the likes, while the top 10% of female profiles receive 46% of the likes. It is, I would say that is above a 10% difference, but it's about 50%. Fair enough. This is despite the well-established gender imbalance in online dating. A Pew survey from 2022 shows 90% of young men and 6.9% of young women were currently using online dating for a ratio of roughly 3.1. 63% of young men and 46% of young women had ever used it before. So what he's saying is that there's about 3 men for every 1 woman on online dating, according to this data set. Returning to the source for the Tinder swipe chart, it also showed a median match rate of about 1 a day for men and 2.7 for women. We should probably adjust for the gender ratio of users at any one time, though, as with more people to match with a higher number of per capita matches is a given. So as this lines up with the gender ratio of current users, the match rate actually evens out. So he's saying that, you get 1 a day for men and 2.7, about 3 for women, but there's also, more men than women. So this number actually equals out to 1 a day for both when you're even when you're accounting for the gender ratio. To the extent that their swipes disproportionately target the same 5% of guys, it doesn't look like they're reciprocated much, as otherwise the median woman would have proportionally more matches than the median guy after adjusting for the gender ratio. Either they're not saving their attention for the same top men nearly as much as is typically inferred from the swipe rate, or these men aren't nearly as willing to reach down in attractiveness level as is typically assumed. Since the same sources also showed the median woman matching with 36% of the profiles they swipe right on, to a significant degree, it has to be the former. So, So I said that maybe it was that the men at the top aren't willing to reach down, but it seems that he's saying that the case is that they're not saving their attention for the same top men. He's basically trying to attack the incel stuff here. I'm not sure what he's basing that off, because he's saying that it's either one or the other, and he's saying that, well, because the median match is 36%, is that he's saying that because women on average match with more people than you would expect, they are actually matching more with people than just trying to go with the one Chad. I think that's what he's saying. I'm trying to go through this in my head out loud. Okay. While the swipe ratio is more imbalanced than you'd expect based on the gender ratio imbalance, we probably shouldn't expect it to be perfectly calibrated. Not just because women practice more selectively in general, but because of a feedback loop whereby, as competition for women's attention increases, women are incentivized to apply more selectivity, as a higher proportion of their swipes will result in a match, until a substantial number of men decide that it's more efficient to adopt a strategy of shoot first and ask questions later. In line with this, Tyson et al. Found in 2016 that 35% of men reportedly frequently casually liking most profile, while no women did. While men send the bulk of initial messages, a higher percentage of them receive replies compared to those sent by women, which hints that at some portion of men are filtering out undesired matches after the fact. So men, again, seem to shoot first and ask questions later, and then sort of not talk to them, right? Just ghost people.
Checks out.
Yep. Cyber Ninja Zero says, I remember hearing a theory analysis that women's hot guys are different, that women are a lot more split on attraction. It's more like a bell curve. Interesting. We've also seen that, unsurprisingly, a lot more men report casual sex as a strong motivator for dating app usage. If everyone were only swiping on profiles they'd consider for a long-term relationship, we might see more convergence. Along with the skewed gender ratio, only a fraction of matches resulting in conversations, a fraction of conversations in the exchange of contact details, 90% of mutual conversations involved the sharing of a phone number in the previous study, a fraction of these leading to dates, and a fraction of these leading to anything means that swipes can only tell us very little. If you've ever seen those people can post, I think Tinder generates or something, like one of these, like are they called like gateway graphs or something, about like you swiped right on like 1,000 people and you messaged with like 100, and then you went on a date with like 2, and then you ended up in a relationship with like 1 out of 1,000. So this is what we're digging down on here. Why don't women like online dating? One question which often arises is why dating apps are so male dominated. They also report a more negative sentiment toward an experience using online dating than do men. And while men and women both tend to say they'd prefer meeting a romantic partner without using online dating, more women than men tend to do that. To the extent that they are, or at least are perceived to be, hookup apps, this will no doubt turn off more women than men. Bars and clubs have similar problems attracting female patrons, even if the chances are infinitesimal. Many men will just be swiping away when they can for a chance at winning the jackpot. As stated earlier, men remain the more active party in courtship, and the majority of the time. When you're being frequently pursued already, you'll naturally feel less incentive to sign up to an app. In a similar vein, many men report ease of communication as a motivating factor. Dating apps are appealing for men who suffer from a lot of anxiety approaching and interacting with women, and they provide a buffer against much of the sting of rejection. Risk aversion could play a role. They may have heard a horror story, which, even if is highly unlikely to occur to them, influenced their perception enough to matter. Some may have had negative experiences, such as being PND'd. I guess that's pumped and dumped. Though, of course, we've established that the narrative that a small minority of men are doing this to a large percentage of women is bunk. A long-standing contention of evolutionary psychology is that men are more visual than women. Some have argued that while this is true in the case of stated preferences, we see similar value placed on looks in people's behavior. Whatever the case, it's probably true that women are at least have a wider set of criteria which may be difficult to properly assess through a dating app profile. Kind of calling back to what Cyber Ninja Zero said with, hot guys are different to women. Being so highly in demand may sound good on paper, but also lead to choice overload. It may be hard to sympathize with this problem from the other side, and you might argue that this isn't as bad as receiving no matches at all, but it is a well-studied phenomenon in psychology. People are more likely to purchase items and be satisfied with their decisions when they're presented with a modest rather than extensive selection. Which is why, the gambit of, let's say you're like Mondelez or Procter & Gamble, or your Nestle, you control the market in the sense of having like 4 maybe products competing with each other, and then sort of using that monopoly to hold every competitor outside. So you're basically just competing with yourself, ending up with all the profits. That's sort of weaponizing that psychological phenomenon. This has also been studied in the context of dating apps. Having a higher number of partner options bred a quote-unquote rejection mindset, an increased dissatisfaction with pictures, and increased pessimism about finding a partner. Many women might simply delete the app soon after downloading it, as they find the overwhelming attention to be mentally draining. This could be conceivably another self-reinforcing cycle, leading to a more skewed gender ratio with time. So even though you might be a giga chad having like 100 women in your inbox, that's only going to cause you to become even more ruthless in finding one who can be your wife. But if you go, what's the meme? If you just go to church, there are only 2 women to select from. So
yeah, if you're going to one of these American Orthodox churches that these accounts are writing about, my church is just have old people in them.
My church is also just, I actually I went to the baptism of a family member not too long ago, in a local church, and baptisms work are kind of like, the baptism is just part of the regular sermon, right? Which means that it's open to the public, and anyone who was there who wasn't there for the baptism was an old person. And we're talking like 70 plus.
That's my experience as well. Every time.
Yeah. Summary. Data on dating app outcomes show a high degree of gender parity regarding meeting, dating, having sex, and forming relationships. The distributions of unique dates are also very similar. Men outnumber women on dating apps about 3-1. When adjusting for this imbalance, the median match rate for men and women on Tinder evens out. The average woman isn't matching with a bunch of chads. Both men and women have a strong desirability skew, but the people who actually end up exchanging messages and going on dates probably tend to be quite close in terms of their within gender desirability rank, like they're, the fives dating the fives. This is less obvious on a swipe app because, for efficiency reasons, many men opt for a serial swiping strategy. Insert the memes where like men, like engineering students, will build like the most intricate mechanisms to like continually swipe right on everything. Dating apps aren't simply hookup apps. Relationships are a strong motivator for using them, at least as strong for men as is casual sex. This motive better predicts meeting up than a sexual motive, and relationships seem at least as common an outcome as a hookup. Also, since hookups can lead to relationships, relationships may be a more common outcome. Dating app users might have more sex partners on average, but this is probably mostly the result of a selection effect whereby individuals higher in social sexuality who are engaging in more casual sex to begin with are more likely to use these apps. There is some tentative evidence for dating apps leading to more sexual encounters, at least among those who are so inclined, but this effect is at best minimal. And of the minority of dating app users who have hooked up through one, most of them had only done so once. This also didn't seem to be disrupting relationships. Do we want to do the conclusion? Let's do the conclusion real quick before we leave. Conclusion. The leap from women on average swiping right on 5% of men to women all hooking up or serially dating 5% of men never made much sense. One thing that has been observed to precipitate a rise in casual sex is a female-skewed gender ratio, as men have more leverage to set the terms of engagement when they're in high demand. This clearly isn't the case here, however. So if you could build a dating app that doesn't get flooded by men, which didn't work for Bumble, right? Bumble's thing was that the women have to initiate, but that didn't work because women don't like initiating, right? And then it got flooded with men once they tried changing that.
Well, it's very difficult, this stuff. Okay, you want usage, and you're going to present people with ads and stuff, but at the same time, you want it to be functional and have people actually show up there. So you have to just like having a bouncer outside of a club, you need to have like some digital censorship stuff there with this certain like behavior that would should just get you kicked off. I assume they already have it on Tinder, but it's just gonna have to be enforced harder, maybe.
Yeah. You could argue that this happens more subtly, such that dark triad chads lead women on by feigning interest in a relationship before callously pumping and dumping their, quote, victims, who repeatedly fall into the same trap as they refuse to settle for their, quote, looks match. This probably overstates not just the amount of chads who are promiscuous bad boys, but also how many women are susceptible to the deception. There's good reason to think that they possess effective defenses against dishonest signals of commitment. Sexual regret may also function to avoid repeatedly making the same mistake in the future. The truth is, there wasn't anything stopping this from happening before the advent of phone apps, especially if it really were the natural dynamic which arose in the absence of enforced monogamy. Not a single phone was needed in the information of any guerrilla harems, for instance. They would at most accentuate it by providing a more efficient and secretive means of facilitation. As is the case now, however, sex partner distributions were similar for each gender, with a minority of both partaking in anything approaching promiscuity. It's click the link. I'm curious. Which link? The chads who are promiscuous bad boys? It's become a truism that most people are meeting online now. though this is based on a tiny sample who met during COVID. The 2017 data point showing 40% of heterosexuals meeting online was also based on a pretty low sample size of 60. The follow-up survey showed a percentage drop to 20 to 25% in 2018 and 19. The real figure is likely in the range of 25 to 30%. The majority of sexual encounters are probably still occurring offline too. In a sample of Norwegians aged 18 to 30, people who had at least one new sex partner in the past year, about 30% had met their last or second to last partner online. Dating apps also seem to be losing their luster among the youth, with match groups, shares, and paying users on the decline. It could be that they are shifting to other online mediums to meet people, such as social media, though. And again, my fear and my question after reading this is, what if they're just, checking out, essentially? What is clearly true about dating apps is that they're clearly not a very effective tool for meeting women. We don't need any more Chadfish experiments to tell us that, yes, being attractive helps your chances quite a bit. It makes sense on an emotional level why this narrative resonates with a lot of men, especially if you aren't in many social situations and have limited connections or alternative avenues. It's not hard to see why it would lead to much frustration and be degrading to one's self-esteem. Neither this nor the popularity of the narrative speaks to its validity, however. You could argue that it shows how women are more actively desired than men, but there is no reason to believe that this gap was produced by the dating apps. With all this in mind, it seems unlikely that dating apps have radically altered the dating landscape or are the proximate cause of many men's dating woes. If it has had an effect, it would be a lot more subtle than shadow police or rampant promiscuity. You might argue that the more superficial format isn't conducive to enduring relationships, as people rush into relationships without the time or information to adequately evaluate compatibility or other traits that are important in a relationship, and they lack a shared social network. A Swiss study, however, found that people in relationships beginning on dating apps didn't differ from those who met offline when it came to relationships or life satisfaction, maybe contradicting the earlier mentioned choice overload theory to an extent, nor marital or fertility intentions. A longitudinal study found that people who had met online didn't predict shorter-lived relationships from 2009 to 2015, and if anything, it predicted faster transitioning to marriage, though another study found a higher rate of divorce during the first 3 years for people meeting online. I would say that, point out that he's right, and a lot of the studies are focusing on modern stuff. It would be interesting to see if, because he's talking about the shared social network, the sort of time and effort to figure out if you're compatible. Like, this would have had to be, has been an equal problem for the past 100 years, give or take, because this is just issues that have propped up, I think, because of reductions in the institution of marriage, right? And parents having less say, right? Things like that. Whatever the impact, it doesn't seem revolutionary. Ironically, this was also the conclusion of Rosenfeld, the lead author behind the study showing the big spike in people meeting online. Quote, "For heterosexuals, the impact of phone dating apps on their dating lives has clearly been overstated in the popular press. Tinder is not, as sales suggested, a sign of the dating apocalypse. Most heterosexuals are stably married, and there is no evidence that phone dating apps or any other modern technology have undermined or will undermine relationship stability in the USA." That's the end of the article. So it seems, according to this article, that you cannot blame the dating app for this. But that doesn't mean that you can't blame other things, but blaming the dating app and, the Giga Chads hoovering up all the women for you not having a girlfriend.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a long article. That's a bit of
I'm
a
sorry, I
marathon.
should have warned you. There's a lot of numbers.
I
had to read this
congrats
like
on
2-3
finishing. That
times
was
just to
pretty.
internalize. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it was a good effort. I'm glad we got through it, but it's a lot to think about, and certainly, I get kind of skeptical because I've also internalized some of the this kind of Giga Chat harem logic for a while. But it's interesting to see some stats I guess that's the problem with a lot of these doomer narratives that you're getting, especially on the E-right, in particular. That especially being around them for as long, you just kind of see that a lot of it doesn't really translate. It doesn't really seem to work. I think that life cycle of those things have been going quicker for me being on Twitter and just trying to record stuff that's happening and following up on it, because there are a lot of problems with modernity, as they say, but there's also a lot of stuff that are just sort of made up, and people are just getting mad over some kind of selection bias stuff, demoralization posting that. I mean, it's stuff that feels emotionally correct, but it's not always borne out by data, as you can see with these examples.
I want to be true, because I used, this as an argument for sort of the institution of marriage, as it were. I don't feel like this being untrue has made my arguments any weaker. In fact, it's just allowed me to focus more on other things, which I think is good, right?
Yes.
You shouldn't be afraid to be proven wrong on something. Because specifically this thing is targeting, the dating app narrative. I still think that, the loss of marriage as an institution, or the decline of marriage as a social institution, has been a huge problem. But I'm going to stop blaming the apps for it, because it's just not true, it seems.
Yeah, it's good to be precise, because I feel like there are a lot of people. I mean, we're going to do that event in September, right, with the Conservative Students Association, and I'm doing a talk there on demographics, birth rates, and population collapse. And I mean, we talked about it previously, but even with that stuff, I feel like there's a lot of traps that people fall into when it comes to social conservatism in particular. They'll get hung up on particular narratives about, because we lost the clear delineation between male and female, or this specific courtship ritual, or like the dating apps or something. They get hung up on some very specific narrative about how social conservatism, how certain social conservative mores have been eroded away, and they blame falling birth rates for that. Even when you could see, I mean, when you look across the world at countries where you just expect that, okay, actually they haven't broken away from traditional roles or something, but they still have diminishing birth rates following higher education, for example, or modernization of their societies. It's easy to
my argument on marriage is just for social stability. Like, the institution of marriage is there for social stability, both in the terms of, if you want to put it crassly, doling out the women in a proper manner, but also ensuring stable families and households, and not unstable families and households.
Yeah, you don't want the hyper-competitive polyamory situation that Jordan Peterson talked about.
And you want, ideally, as few divorces as possible, right?
Yes.
And as few men beating their wives as possible, right? and removing the social technology, as it were, that was the institution of marriage has done a lot of bad, because we haven't built up any alternatives, really. And when I say that, I mean all certain... the small kind of parts of courtship, as it were.
I mean, what seems to be the modern version of that, like the modern arrangement for it in the time that we live in, with very high life expectancies and say relatively liberal social mores, is like the serial monogamy, right? You've heard that term before, probably, but it's like people are they get into long-term relationship that lasts for maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, and they break off, and they go into another one that might last 5 years, which is sort of not ideal, but it's a more stable one, I think, than harems.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a bit of a serial monogamist before settling down, as it were. But in between the monogamy was like the dating time, and I don't know. I'm not sure if that made it better or worse. If anything, dating a girl for like 2 years and then breaking up with her usually made me very focused on what I didn't want. Right? Like, that was awful. I don't want to do that, right? Too bad I spent 2 years doing it, right? That's kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So, but by the time when I met my wife, I basically had like a list of criteria that I presented her, which is like, this is the thing I'm looking for. If you disagree, then we can just stop because I'm done. I'm done messing around.
Oh, but that's a good thing, though. At least there
That
was a learning,
gambit paid
learning
off though
process
because she
there.
found
Yeah.
that attractive. So, yeah. All right. Well, I think it's that we're way past due. This is someone wrote. It was Long Article House this time.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for watching. Luddic Path. Anything you want to shill?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter if you like. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night. Have a good night. You can follow me on Twitter as well. As you mentioned, Luddic Path, late in September, if you live in the north of Norway, if you are a student, we are going to be speaking at a conservative student association in the northern Norway. Keep your eyes open for that. It is called the FAKS organization. If you just put that into Google and you're in Norway, you'll be able to find it. We would love to see you there. Other than that, I wish you a good evening, a good weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.